Lime vibe ความแลบไป lime ความแลบไป vibe Lime vibe ความแลบไป lime ความแลบไป vibe Lime vibe โอ้ Lime vibe Lime vibe ความแลบไป lime ความแลบไป vibe Lime vibe ความแลบไป lime ความแลบไป vibe Lime vibe โอ้ Lime vibe
Good night, everybody, and welcome once again to another Lime Vibe Live podcast. Buenas noches, la familia. ¿Cómo está, ustedes? Muy bien, gracias. Good night. Thank you for joining me for another Lime Vibe Live podcast. I'm your host, Yori Araman Kemp, here from Nassau, Bahamas. Thank you for joining me once again on this auspicious occasion as we celebrate tonight the goodness and the grace of God. It's always a good night when God's in control, when God's on the throne. Thank you so much for joining me. If you have not done so, please like, share, and subscribe to our Facebook and YouTube page and our Twitch page as well. That's Lime Vibe 77. That's Lime Vibe 77 on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. We will be glad to have you. You can see all of our old and previous shows. You can even see some interviews as well. So thank you once again for joining us tonight. Okay, let's get right off the bat. Let's start right here. We're going to talk about what happened early on this week. Early on this week, they had the SIDS conference in the Small Island Developing States Conference in Antigua and Barbuda. It was the fourth conference of its kind, and we had some interesting speakers. We had the UN Secretary General there, and it was hosted by Prime Minister Gaston Brown out of Antigua and Barbuda. Okay, he was talking about having a global carbon tax for large polluters like oil companies and larger countries as well that offer a lot of pollution and throw a lot of pollution into the air. And you can't argue with it, they should be paying a global carbon tax if they're going to pollute. But then, when you think about it though, I mean, if they have the money to spend for that global carbon tax, then they'll just dump anywhere they want to, right, and just pay the tax. So the tax has to be significantly high. But some of these large countries, they can pay the tax. Charging the United States $1 billion a year for a global carbon tax is not really going to put a dent in the United States plan. Even charging someone like Exxon, $1 billion a year, it's going to hurt their revenue, but really it's going to stop Exxon from really pumping oil and selling gasoline and selling fuel and selling carbon related products. No, it's not. So it has to go beyond just a global carbon tax, man. That's what I feel, But then, Gaston Brown, he sits in the chair, he knows better than me because he's been dealing with this. He's the Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, and you have to respect him. And so we'll leave it like that. We also had Prime Minister Philip Davis from the Bahamas as well, saying he does not want to be a climate martyr. All right? He's saying that his country is on fire. The Bahamas is on fire, suffering with bushfires every other month. There were 3 islands this year. There was Grand Bahama, there was Abaco, and there was Andros, all suffering bushfires. And also as well as the capital island of New Providence, Nassau. These fires were just burning out of control. And they finally got them under control. But, they were raging for like weeks on end sometimes. The fire in Andros was blazing for about a whole month. And the people from South Florida, Miami, South Florida, could have actually smelled the smoke burning from Andros. Okay, that's how big the bushfire was. And so those people were suffering there in Andros. So he said his country's on fire. And so he doesn't want to be a climate martyr. And so he's asking for action to deal with, not just with carbon-related issues, but also help to clean up and help to mitigate against these new bushfires, because now we're suffering with hurricanes, and now we have to suffer with bushfires as well, and with a scarcity of water. We have to do something about this, man. We just can't sit here and suffer like this. And we're not responsible for any of it. The Caribbean and small island developing states, they're not responsible for any of it. All right, we are victims of this entire thing. So I guess when you put the global carbon tax in perspective, it may help us, but it really would not help. It really would not dent the larger countries. We need a more comprehensive plan, I think. And it wouldn't really dent the larger polluters. It just wouldn't. You know, BP, British Petroleum, they suffered a huge fine as a result of the BP spill that happened back in 2009, I think it was, the Deepwater Horizon spill, and they suffered tremendously, and they never shut down. You know, they paid a huge, hefty fine. Let me find the amount they paid in fines. BP oil spill. It was 2010. I'm sorry, 2010. The Deepwater Horizon oil spill. Spent. Let's see how much they spent. They spent about $63.4 billion on just cleaning up the spill. And we're not even talking about damages. All right? Let's see what damages. They spent about $63.4 billion on the Deepwater Horizon spill with BP in the Gulf of Mexico. Damages caused. It was $61.6 billion in damages. All right, so they spent over $120 billion, not billion, $120 billion in damages and cleanup efforts. That's BP, oil giant BP. So they have the money to spend on that. So the global carbon tax is not really going to put a dent in some of these companies. You know, it's just not going to do it. And you're not going to get it anyway, I think, not to any significant level. You may kick a few profits back to us, which will be good. You know, we can do some development things with that, but it's still going to have the large-scale pollution, and that's what we really want to stop. Let's keep our eye focused on what's the real problem, and overall pollution and environmental damage. You know, giving us a few dollars is not really going to solve that, I think. It'll help, it'll help, you know. Then we also have, in Haiti, they have a new prime minister. Just weeks after they selected a former prime minister, Fritz Belair. Fritz Belair has been kicked out. He's been discarded. His vote has been discarded. And they're bringing back a former prime minister as well, Gary Conille. He was a former prime minister under Michel Martelly between 2011 and 2012. And so he's well known to the international circle. He was a UN development specialist as well. He's known by the US. He's a known entity. He has experience being the prime minister. He was a former prime minister during 2011, 2012 is what I said. And so, you know, he's a better pick than Fritz Belair, I think, because, you know, Fritz Belair was just a regular sports minister. He was never really on the inside of how to run the government, all right? And so you just can't pick anybody at a time like this. You need someone with a bit of experience, and Gary Conille brings that from what I understand. So I'm glad they stepped back from Fritz Belair, even though it looks like a herky-jerky thing, and they're playing musical chairs with these prime ministers. But I'm glad they picked someone who's a bit more seasoned in Gary Conille. I say the earlier selection of Fritz Belair was discarded by the 7-member Transitional Council as they started re-accepting submissions for the position of Prime Minister from May 13th to May 17th. And on May 27th, they chose former Prime Minister Conille as the successor to Fritz Belair. So that's in the space of about a month. They went through 3 prime ministers, you know. So, you know, you got to pray for Haiti, man. They're going to get it right. But I'm glad they stepped back from Fritz Belair. I don't know him very well. He looks kind of old as well. And like I said, he never really was a cabinet minister on the inside because he was just a regular sports minister. So we just have to take that for what it is. And I'm glad they made a right choice in bringing back someone who's seasoned. And he's not going to be there forever. He's just going to help to lead the country into the next general election, hold the country together, after we know we couldn't work with Ariel Henry. Okay? He's not going to be there forever. He's just there for the time being. And I hope Haitians see that. I hope he brings some peace to the country as well. You know? I hope he brings some peace and gets some of these gangs off the street. Because barbecue is not playing. Barbecue is not playing at all. Barbecue is holding the country at ransom. And people are being shot and killed in Haiti, man. I don't think we understand how bad it is where people can't go out to school and they can't do regular things because the gangs have Haiti under a chokehold. I'm glad I live in the Bahamas and not there. I'm so glad. Another story as well. They said the United Nations, the ECLAC, the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, report that fiscal deficits widen across the LAC, Latin American Caribbean economies, as you know, countries start to fall, the economy started to falter due to international tensions and increases in financial costs. Okay, so not only that these international tensions are putting stress on some of our economies, we're finding it harder to even borrow money because of all the things that are going on. So we're borrowing at higher costs, and it's draining us, you know. Our debt service ratio, our debt service really is high, you know. And people don't understand this, you know, that paying off the debt, the interest on the debt is a huge burden for some of these Caribbean countries. And we're seeing it, and the ECLAC is saying exactly just that. And this is out of their fiscal panorama report for 2024. It comes in every May. So the fiscal panorama 2024, released this May, said, in 2023, public finance trends in Latin America and the Caribbean were framed by faltering economic growth, a reduction in the international prices of non-renewable natural resources, an increase in financial costs, and rising geopolitical tensions. Okay, that's a trifecta of bad news. Okay, so that means we have a bleak 2024 to look forward to. Now, with this being an election year in the United States, we're going to be in for a rough time, man. And I got to tell you this, man. Speaking about geopolitical issues as well, this Israeli-Palestinian war is not going to ease up until the United States elections are over. And all depends on who wins, how quickly it comes to an end. This is just, the basic, kickstart, geopolitical nonsense that happens before every U.S. election. Let me see it happen every time, I think U.S. political pundits call it the October surprise, and ever since the October surprise back in, let's see when the October surprise was, back with Reagan, with the Iranian Contra scandal, Iranian hostage scandal, when all of a sudden, Jimmy Carter couldn't get it right, and, American hostages were held by Iranians, and then, a day after Ronald Reagan won the election, they were released and everything was okay. It was all just a ploy to lead up to the November presidential elections. They call it the October surprise, and ever since that, let me see what year it was. October surprise, let's see what it was. In politics in the United States, October surprise is a news event that may influence the outcome of an upcoming November election, whether deliberately planned or spontaneously occurring. Ever since that happened, we've been having one every election. Close that out, sorry. And it happened in Ronald Reagan's 1980 presidential campaign. Yeah. Yep. And ever since that, it's gotten a little more serious, and it's gotten to the point where the October surprise really isn't an October surprise anymore. Everyone knows it's happening in October, but sometimes it happens a full year out before the U.S. presidential elections. And now we're seeing the Israeli-Palestinian conflict playing out a full year before the U.S. elections. And then Biden really is weak too as well, huh? Biden is a real weak president. I kid you not. I mean, that's pretty much obvious, right? The world is burning. You have Russia and Ukraine. You have Israel and Palestinian war. What's next? Then you have Haiti in the dump. Haiti's a dump fire. And now China is getting ready to attack Taiwan. And they've been making serious efforts to attack Taiwan to the point where the United States had to send Green Berets to come and train the Taiwanese military against a possible attack from China. This is what we're facing right now. The world's on fire. No one's really talking about that, No one's really talking about the impending invasion of China into Taiwan, while everyone's pulling back from Taiwan except the United States. And it just shows you how dangerous this world is. I can't believe we're going to sit here and watch China just invade Taiwan. Unprovoked. I mean, Taiwan has nothing to do with China anymore. The ruling elites have a democracy. They're happy with what they have. And we're just going to sit there and let the Chinese just run over Taiwan. For what? China doesn't need Taiwan. They're just doing it because they can. It's just world domination. It's just imperialistic power. That's the Chinese we're dealing with. So if you let that happen, God knows what China will do to every other country in that same Southeast Asia region. And what it will do to world economies, and what it will do to our way of life over here. So I want people to think about that when they're taking Chinese money, especially these Latin American countries who want Chinese money handled with it. Think about that very, very carefully. How much is going to change your life if the United States were to be taken down a peg and China would be put even higher than what they are, and they control world trade in Southeast Asia. Just think about that. That's a very serious thing to think about. So you think about that, all right? And then we also have the big international news story. The former president, the U.S. President Donald Trump, is being convicted on all 34 counts of his hush money scandal. Okay, he was guilty of all 34 counts of falsifying business records, and this is the first time a U.S. president has been convicted of a felony, a crime. The jury reached its verdict in this historic case after 9.5 hours of deliberations, which began on Wednesday this week. He will be sentenced on July 11th, just 4 days before the Republican National Convention. He faces penalties from a fine to 4 years in prison on each count. Each count he faces 4 years. Although it's expected he should be sentenced for the offenses concurrently but not consecutively. So that means he's going to be sentenced, one with the other. Not serve 4 years and serve another 4 years. But even so, I think he's going to appeal this, and we'll see how it happens with the appeal. And we all know that the New York state is not a real Republican state, and they probably hate Republican presidential candidates anyway. And even though Donald Trump is from New York, I think he's pissed a lot of people off in New York City as well. So let's listen to a MSNBC report how they played out the charges against Donald Trump. Let's listen.
We've got a verdict. Ari Melber.
We are looking at count 1, guilty. Count 2, guilty. Count 3, guilty. Count 4, guilty. Count 5, guilty. Those are the first 5 counts coming out of this jury, finding Donald J. Trump guilty on the first 5 felony counts. Reading the rest as we are getting it from our court reporters.
Starting with count 6.
Count 6, guilty. Count 7, guilty. Count 8, guilty. And you'll see on the screen we're tracking ahead. Count 9, guilty. Count 10, guilty. Count 11, guilty. Count 12, guilty. Count 13, guilty. Count 14, guilty. Count 16, guilty. Count 17, guilty. Count 18, guilty. Count 19, guilty. Count 20, guilty. Count 21, guilty. Count 22, guilty. Count 23, guilty. Count 24, guilty. Count 25, guilty. Count 26, guilty. Count 27, we're seeing that on screen, guilty. Count 28, guilty. Those are the first 28 felony counts here as read by the jury. Count 29, guilty. Count 30, guilty. Count 31, guilty. Count 32, guilty. Count 33 and 34, guilty. That is Donald J. Trump, defendant in New York versus Donald Trump, found guilty on all 34 felony counts. That is the verdict here in this case.
Rachel.
Listen, it's a unanimous jury verdict, unanimous on all counts. This is a definitive and, this is an irreducible verdict. He can appeal. I'm sure he will appeal. But this is everything that the prosecution asked for from a jury that, by all accounts, took this thing very, very seriously. We counted the deliberation hours down here. The test here for us as a country is not about what happens on appeal and is not about what happens in sentencing. The test for us now as a country is whether or not this former president and his allies will have succeeded in trying to undermine the rule of law so that people reject this as a legitimate function of the rule of law in our country. They have tried to delegitimize this judge. They have tried to delegitimize this court. They have tried to delegitimize these proceedings. They've even tried to delegitimize the laws that he was charged under. Those efforts are the test that we now have as a country. The people involved in bringing this case have been threatened and intimidated and had everything brought to bear against them in a way that was designed to delegitimize this process in the eyes of the American people. It is now in the hands of the American people to decide if we will accept those efforts or whether we will stand by the rule of law and recognize this as a fair proceeding.
Well, a wise woman said a few nights ago, 2 Mondays ago, that the rule of law is mortal. It needs to be protected. It isn't an abstract thing. And today, the people have names that we've all come to know. They're named Joshua Steinglass. They're named Alvin Bragg. They're named Susan Hoffinger.
Yeah. And there are other cases that are pending against Donald Trump as a criminal defendant. The difference is that we now know as a country what it is to put a former president on trial and to see that trial to fruition. That is something that was hypothetical before we ever had this guy as a former president. But now we have lived through it, and we know that the court process can work. A defendant who is a former president can be tried as a normal defendant. Again, the appeals process will go on, the sentencing process will go on, and those will all be pressure points. But the legal system in this country treats any former president as any citizen. We've seen that today, and this jury deserves to be thanked for their efforts and to be protected from the kinds of attacks and intimidation and recrimination that the president and his allies have tried to bring down on this process.
Let me just tell folks what's happened. What Ari said or Andrew said would happen has happened. Judge Merchan went juror to juror to juror. They all concurred with the verdict that Donald Trump is guilty on all 34 criminal counts, 34 felonies. And they have been thanked for their service, Ari.
Yeah, what you just reported and what Rachel was reminding us is actually existing in a microcosm within the trial, because the jury is being polled, a jury of the peers of the defendant, as is his right. So that's legally something where the defense counsel is asked, do you want to make sure? They almost always, virtually always say yes. And so we're told, and we're looking at our notes here, pardon me for looking down, but our reporters are seeing the defendant, Donald Trump, is looking at the jury, is watching them as they are individually polled. But this is, as Rachel reminded us, someone who has been held in contempt for what he has said and done against other people and witnesses in the system. So I would call that a fairly intense moment, but good for the jury and good for the system to go right through it. Our reporters also telling us that while Trump has rarely shown emotion or changed his, quote, demeanor throughout the trial right now, he's only looking down. Eric Trump reportedly looking upset, and that's the scene in the room as they go through it.
Sure. When you say poll the jury, what you mean is individually, jurors by number will be asked, is this your verdict? And then they each have to answer orally. They have to say out loud, yes.
Yes, and that's the transparency.
It's got to be a scary moment for those individual jurors.
Right, as they're being stared down, but it's a transparency in our system. You said something so important. The system worked. We discussed earlier when we were awaiting this that it works not because of the result, but because of the process. And that if it were an acquittal, we would be discussing that the system went forward. This is that system, and the judge and the bailiffs and others are there to protect the people and protect them in a physical sense as needed. But what we are hearing is that this jury heard the evidence, asked these questions. We know some of what was on their minds. We haven't heard from them other than the verdict, and now are confirming that this is their unanimous verdict. And so it's a matter of transparency that everyone sees each of them confirm what was officialized today, that Donald Trump is guilty, that all 12 jurors unanimously reached that decision through their reasoning with each other on all 34 counts.
Andrew.
Just to Rachel's point, there is something in every trial when the jury is polled that is sort of magical and fundamental to this country, where the jurors, each one stands up and counts as a citizen. And these are people who have everyday lives. They didn't ask to be here. And that moment where the country this is what the country stands for. This is what the rule of law means. And jurors take it so seriously. And yes, it can be scary because of it, but you know what? They did their job. And I think that this is a testament to our joining so many other democracies in the international community who have managed to hold political leaders to account. And we have shown that we can do that as well in a fair process where the defendant got extremely good counsel, had an incredibly fair process from this judge, in spite of his attacking the witnesses, the judge's family, the jurors. Everybody did their job. And finally, on a small bore, Alvin Bragg both personally was attacked. He was vilified for saying no to this case when he first took office, and people said, that how could he do that? And he said, after he said it wasn't ready. And this is a real vindication for him that he said, I'm going to bring it when it is ready and if it is ready. And then he brought it. And it's a real testament that he said, yes, now I think this case could be brought. And he did. And I think everyone understood from the moment David Pecker took that stand. I think a lot of people, including myself, reevaluated this case and said, you know what, I understand this is not just hush money. This was about fundamentally changing the 2016 election. That was the goal here. And clearly the jurors believed that.
I'm also just now thinking about the E. Jean Carroll case when the judge at the end told the jurors that jury was anonymized. He said, forget you were here in substance. And now today the judge has actually said that they can discuss the case if they like. The choice is theirs, but they no longer are barred from discussing it. And he's actually also asked to meet with them to discuss their work, not to discuss the case, but to discuss their work. So we don't know what time these jurors are going to get out of the building tonight, but he's going to sit down with them. And then after that, I imagine they're going to hear from pretty much every reporter that has been covering this. Hundreds of reporters will descend on them to try and get them to talk about the inner workings of that jury room.
Is Vaughn Hilliard still with us? Vaughn, just tell me
Hey,
what
Nicole. Yeah, I think part of
what's going on down there.
Yeah, I think part of this is what is going to take place from here on out. We're 5 months from the November election, and we talked about what a guilty verdict could mean to the stakes of this election. Donald Trump is repeatedly called November 5th the most important day in American history. That is election day coming up. And for him, this only increases the stakes. Number one, these are state charges here. We do not know what his sentence will be. If he'll just be fined, probation, or whether he will be facing jail time. That is going to be the determination of Judge Merchan. And when you look at the election, of course, the expectation is that if you were to win the White House, that prison sentence, if he were to get one, would be suspended or whatever the punishment is here. But for Donald Trump, he has already sent out a fundraising video in the last 24 hours to his supporters that they were going to be throwing him in jail here in New York. And so for him, he has every intention of using this to his political advantage to the extent he can. And I think the first statement to come from any of his family members since this verdict was issued, I think is an example of that. That would be Don Jr., who was not here at the courthouse today. He was here yesterday. Eric Trump was inside the courtroom, currently still is. And I just want to read for you Don Jr.'s tweet, if I could. Quote, guilty on all counts. The Democrats have succeeded in their years-long attempt to turn America into a third world expletive. November 5 is our last chance to say that. I read that last line, November 5 is our last chance to say that because Donald Trump himself on the campaign trail has repeatedly suggested that the end of America is near if they does not take back the White House. From our team of reporters and they say Donald Trump, the defendant, has been seated inside of that courtroom, stoic, stone-faced. He looked at each of the jurors as they walked out, all 12 of those New Yorkers, as they walked out of the courtroom. This is somebody who is still seated in a straightforward position, understanding the political stakes now that he has been found guilty of these 34 felony counts here in New York.
And there you have it. You know, Donald Trump is being found guilty on all 34 counts. Of course he's going to appeal. Will it make a difference in the presidential election? I don't know. You know, I think his supporters and Republican supporters are with him hard nailed to the end. I think a lot of people are just now dealing with the ravages of a Biden economy, and they realize that, you know, Biden can't go another term. And the Democrats wouldn't sit him down. You know, and so we're dealing with this right now, and Trump looks strong. So it all depends on can the Republicans actually sweep Donald Trump off the stage before he gets to the election. And I doubt it. I doubt it. You know, his supporters are very rabid. I think we're going to have a Donald Trump president again. You know, that notwithstanding the state conviction. And we're going to have Donald Trump as the president of the United States again. It's just not going to change the outcome of what's going to happen in the November election. You know? And everyone understands that it's critical now for the United States. They need someone who is a bit more stronger than Joe Biden. And Donald Trump has won all the primaries. He's going to the convention, the Republican convention. He's going to have to take a monumental act of God to get Donald Trump off of the Republican convention ticket. And if that happens, then you know God was involved in that altogether. That's what's going to have to happen. And so, you know, notwithstanding these 34 counts he's found guilty of for Stormy Daniels, and then you have to think about it as well too, you know. No one's really taking, you know, what the people would really be feeling about Stormy Daniels, hush money for Stormy Daniels. You want us to really take down an important figure like Donald Trump for a porn star? And it may be unfair, but that's how people think about it, you know. Do you want us to really take a whore serious over Donald Trump? I mean, it's unfair that people think about it, but that's how people think about it. I'm just putting it out there. You know, so let's not lose sight of that as well. So we understand what we're dealing with right now. So other than that, I mean, it is what it is. And so let's just recap what we talked about tonight, man. We talked about early on the CITES conference in Antigua and Barbuda this week, and how, you know, Prime Minister Gaston Brown of Antigua and Barbuda said that he wants a global carbon tax on larger polluters. And it has some point. It's going to give some money to us, but it's not going to hold real polluters to account. It's not going to really put a dent into the pollution. And so we have to take that into consideration, man. And then we also had Prime Minister of the Bahamas, Philip Davis, KC, King's Council, saying that, you know, he does not want to be a climate martyr. He doesn't want to see the Bahamas wiped off the map. So it's about time he stands up now for his country. And I agree with Prime Minister Davis, you know, because he's dealing with bushfires. He hasn't even hurricanes in the next few months. And so now he has to deal with bushfires that never used to happen in April and May. You know, it's we used to have rains in April and May. It used to be the spring rain. Not a spring rain no more. It hasn't rained in this country on some islands in about weeks. Usually every day in spring we would have some sort of rain shower, some kind of sprinkle. We're not seeing any rain, man. That's not good for a tropical country like this. And instead of that, we're having burnings, we're having bushfires. On 4 islands, we have one in Andros that was burning for almost a month. We had another one in Abaco was almost burning for a month as well. We had another one in Grand Bahama, and we had one in New Providence. It actually almost shut down the airport in New Providence. Okay? It happened in the Coral Harbor area that nearly shut down the entire airport. No planes could land after a certain while. They had to circle around until they were given the all clear. So that's what we're dealing with there. So, I mean, let's take that serious, man. Let's take, you know, how we're going to deal with this environment serious. Then we also had a change in Haiti. They kicked out Fritz Belair, who was selected as the Prime Minister by the Transitional Council, and they put back former Prime Minister Gary Corneille, who was a former Prime Minister under the Martelly administration in 2011-2012. And, you know, Corneille brings a lot more experience. He brings a lot more experience to the table, and much more than Fritz Belair, who was just a regular sports minister, who never really dealt with the inner workings of a cabinet, you know, having to run a cabinet. He was a part of a cabinet, but he doesn't know how to run a cabinet. Plus, Fritz Belair was you could tell it was a setup. You could tell they were trying to put up a puppet in Fritz Belair. You could tell that was what that was, okay? And so they brought back an old known face to the international community. He was a UN development specialist, and he's known by the United States, so he's respected. And so he's not going to be there forever, okay? But it's definitely a better face than what we had with Fritz Belair. And so, you know, I bless that. You know, he's only there to lead the country into the next general election until they select the president. He's not going to stay there forever. And the smartest thing they did was have this transitional council to actually select somebody in the interim, okay? So I see some light for Haiti. Let's hope they can keep this together, all right? They made the right decision by pulling back from Fritz Belair, I think. My personal opinion. Not to slander the man, but that's what I think. Okay? Then we also spoke about, you know, the ECLAC, the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, talking about, you know, deficits widened across the LAC, the Latin American Caribbean region, and economies began to falter because of geopolitical conflict, as well as the high financial costs of borrowing. And so, yeah, we're going to have a hard 2024 from what they're seeing is what they're projecting is out. They said in their fiscal panorama report for 2024, they said, released in May, they said in 2023, public finance trends in Latin America and the Caribbean were framed by faltering economic growth, a reduction in the international prices of non-renewable and natural resources, an increase in financial costs, and rising geopolitical tensions. And we're seeing that right now in 2024 as we linger on with these wars in Ukraine and Palestine, okay? And this is not going to stop, and especially the war in Israel and Palestine is not going to stop until we actually have a U.S. presidential election completed, and we have a new president of the United States. Most likely it's going to be Trump, okay? And so that's not going to stop until we have a new president in the United States. It's the October surprise, just running a little longer than beforehand, because everyone got used to the October surprise coming in October, but now we're having conflagrations leading a whole year out for the entire U.S. presidential election. There's a lot at stake. The world's at stake. This is a real serious thing. A few Palestinians dying in Israel, you know, it's collateral damage to the U.S. presidential election, okay? And that's just the way, you know, some of these war hawks, they see it. And people who are fighting for power in the United States, that's just the way they see it. And so, yeah, just be cautious of what's going on with the U.S. presidential election. This happens every U.S. presidential election. It's just that sometimes it happens longer than what it was before, but it happens every U.S. presidential election. Also, we also spoke about, you know, Donald Trump being convicted on all 34 counts of his hush money trial in a New York federal court. So Donald Trump was found guilty on all 34 counts of falsifying business records, the first time a U.S. president was ever convicted of a felony. What a shame. It's not going to stop us training for the U.S. president election in November, though. It's not going to stop the train at all. So, my friends, thank you so much for joining me for another Line Vibe Live podcast. If you have not done so, please like, share, and subscribe to our Facebook and YouTube and Twitch page. That's Line Vibe 77. That's Line Vibe 77 on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. And please, if you have not done so, please, send a donation. The donate link is inside the description. And we're going to change that donate link as well tonight because we have a new paid partner, a new payment system. We're going to change that tonight. So don't bother sending any money to that anymore. We're going to put up a new payment link, and we're going to tell you how to support the Line Vibe Live podcast. So this is Yori Kemp here from Nassau, Bahamas with the Line Vibe Live podcast. We hope to see you again next week, Friday, as we come back again with some other hot news from around the region. Thank you so much. I'll see you guys later. Let's get out of here.